Good evening, fellow Plexers. I wanted to record a short video now that I've got Plex running on my new Ugreen DXP4800 Plus NAS. Now, I've got the original 8 gigabytes of RAM in it, and I have another Samsung RAM module coming tomorrow sometime to double it to 16 gigabytes. I probably should have popped 32 gigabytes into this, but I didn't. So how I've set it up, I took two 1 terabyte M.2 drives to put the two bottom slots, and I created a RAID 1 volume. That's my first volume. And then I had four older 4 terabyte Seagate drives, or Seagate Iron Wolf drives laying around that are from 2019. They were the first four drives I popped into my older Synology NAS, and I haven't used them in probably a couple years. So they're making up an a RAID 6 volume. So I have the RAID 1 SSD volume, and that's where two Docker containers are running off from right now. And then I have my normal test public domain media on the rusty RAID 6 volume. So let's see, let's go into Docker. So I basically followed the Marius hosting instructions on getting Portainer installed, which involved opening up SSH and SSHing into this NAS from my Linux desktop through terminal. Then I got my, I ran the ID command to find the permission numbers I needed, and then I ran what was necessary to get Portainer installed, and then I disabled SSH. From that point on, I used Portainer to get the Plex container running. So pretty standard stuff. It wasn't a hard NAS to set up. It took about 22 hours to create the rusty volume and maybe 20 minutes to create the SSD volume. So let's go into Portainer and into stacks, and I'll show you the environment of how I set Plex up. So I'm using the Linux server image, and this Portainer stack is basically the same as I use under Ubuntu or I use on my Synology NAS, with one exception. So you see the Docker volume points to volume 1, the Docker shared folder, the Plex subfolder, and then the alias is config. And that's read-write permission. So the media goes to volume 2. Media-Plex is my shared folder, and the alias I see inside of the Plex container is Plex-Ugreen-Media. And that's read-only. It should only be read-write if you're going to run a Plex DVR. So I don't usually set my other containers up this way, but I'm taking a hint from Unraid, how I have my Unraid Plex container set up that points back to my Synology NAS. I'm creating a RAM drive basically, and I'm using half of the 8 gigabytes of RAM. When the other stick comes in, I'll change this from 4 to 8 to then use half of the available RAM. Which is why I mentioned that I probably should have set this up with 32 gigabytes of RAM, because I could use 16 for Plex hardware accelerated transcoding. But this is not going to be my production Plex server. I'm just testing this out to see how the Ugreen NAS compares to what I'm used to with a Synology NAS or running Plex pointed at a Synology NAS on a fast little Intel-based NUC. So the next two lines under devices enable the hardware acceleration, And I've got my time zone in here, and these are the PUID and PGID numbers for my admin user on this little Ugreen NAS. So that's my Plex server container. And you see it running there. So let's go to the web app. You'll see I've got this same movie streaming on 4 different devices. It's transcoding on 3 of them down to 720p. I've got the HEVC transcoding enabled, and I have subtitles enabled, and it's a ASS subtitle that's embedded in this media container folder. So this is the only direct stream off my Google Pixel 8 Pro phone, and you see that the bitrate is 192 megabits per second. Now when this is first added to the server, the bitrate is higher, and then once it's indexed, it must come up with an average. So this is a pretty dense movie bitrate wise. So I just wanted to show you the 1 in transcode, or 3 in transcode and 1 direct streaming. We can slide down, and you see that my CPU is not really being used because the hardware acceleration is happening on 3 streams. That's off the iGPU, and then the direct stream doesn't use any CPU anyway. You do see that my system RAM is low for Plex. Well, the RAM for Plex is low, but the system RAM is higher, and that's because of the RAM drive basically I have set up, and that's 3 hardware accelerated streams happening in RAM besides the normal NAS overhead, whatever's going on with RAM with that. So we can look at that differently through the Ugreen interface by going into Task Manager. So if we look at CPU, the yellow is the temperature and the blue-green is the utilization rate. And if we look at our GPU, we see that the 3 hardware accelerated streams are kind of going up and down, and that's probably because part of the video is being cached, and then it's calling on the transcoder to work again, and it's cached and it drops off, and we're still about 50%. We'd go into the memory, we see that we're using about 60% of the total memory. Now I hope to do this same test again once the extra memory is in, and maybe we'll only use 30%. I'm not sure what we'll find. And now this NAS is connected to my gig-capable network switch and my gig-capable mesh router with Cat6 cables, and the mesh router is connected to my Verizon Fios ONT. All right, let's go back to Plex. I've got the volume down on everything, and you see that my cell phone is buffering a little bit. That's the only stream that's buffering. And I noticed that before I started filming the video, or recording the video. It doesn't buffer when it's being forced into a transcode. All right, it's in transcode now. So if we watch, the CPU is probably going to stay about the same. RAM's creeping up a little bit. And if we go back to the Ugreen interface, we see the bump in RAM. And again, it's only 8 gigabytes. I've only dedicated 4 to transcoding. The GPU hasn't changed too much with the peak, and it's still dropping down in valleys once the stream got going. And we do see a little rise in the CPU. So with just 8 gigabytes of RAM, this seems like a very capable NAS. So let me go to the HTPC client app. Let me just throw a little bit of this on the screen. And we'll take this on a transcode. And the change will be instantaneous as soon as I press enter. All right, so now we've got, this is a direct stream. And then we've got the 3 other transcoded stream of a high bitrate 4K HEVC movie. So let's pop this back into the same 720p 4 megabits per second transcode, and I'm hitting enter now. So about 3 seconds to start the movie up. I don't think that's bad at all. I think this Pentium Silver processor with its iGPU is a decent little powerhouse for this DXP4800 Plus Ugreen NAS. So let's look at that, the hardware specs of this. And where do we find that? Is a control panel and about. So it's a Pentium Gold 8505 processor. And we'll have to Google the iGPU. We don't have to Google it. Plex will tell us. All right, so if we go into the settings, make sure I'm on the right server, go into transcode. Okay, so it's an Intel Alder Lake UP3 GT1 UHD graphics. I think this is doing a fine job. So whenever the memory comes in, I will run another comparison to this point here with 4 transcoded streams. We will see if the utilization rate rises above 30% for the CPU, and whether the GPU rises above 50% after they're all streaming for a while with dips in it. See if the memory cuts in half down to around 30% from the 60% it's at, or 65% it's at. And we'll just see, because this is kind of light on memory with just 8 gigabytes. I have 20 gigabytes in each of my older Synology models. Okay, thanks for watching, and the first test is pretty good, and it was pretty easy to set up. And that's as a Synology NAS owner since 2019. Happy Plexing.